Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of sources and distill the vital, unexpected threads that truly make you well-informed.
Today, our focus is an artist whose professional career, it barely even spanned 2 years.
But his influence is it's inescapable.
Yeah.
We're talking about Charles Hardin Holly, who the entire world knows as Buddy Holly.
It's arguably one of the most pivotal and frankly tragic short careers in all of rock history.
It really is.
Yeah.
So when we look at the source material for this deep dive, the biographies, the musical analysis, the testimonials, our mission becomes pretty clear, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. We have to unpack how this young man from Lubbock, Texas, didn't just write some of rock and roll's most timeless songs. And this is crucial, he basically provided the architectural blueprint for the modern rock band.
The blueprint. I love that phrasing.
That's what it was. We're distilling the details of a life lived with just incredible intensity between, roughly 1952 and that plane crash in 1959.
And when you say architectural blueprint, you're talking about the standard rock lineup, right? The 2 guitars, bass, and drums.
That's the one. The format that basically every major band from the Beatles right on through to today would adopt.
And he's only 22 when he died. It's just, The legacy is monumental.
Exactly. He was the prototype. His work was so distinctive, so influential. It's why he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in its very first class in 1986.
Right alongside Elvis and Chuck Berry.
He belongs in that company. And even as late as 2010, Rolling Stone ranked him number 13 on their list of the 100 greatest artists. So this isn't just about nostalgia for you, the listener. It's about recognizing the foundation that so much popular music was built on.
Okay, so let's unpack that blueprint. Let's see where those foundational pieces were first laid down, starting way back in Lubbock, Texas.
Right in the depths of the Great Depression, Charles Hardin Holly was born there September 7th, 1936.
Youngest of 4 children.
And the whole family was musical. All the siblings, Larry, Travis, Patricia Lou, and Buddy, they could all play an instrument or sing.
I think their father was the only one who didn't play.
That's right. Ello, their dad, was the exception, but he was incredibly supportive. He was always encouraging them to sing hymns, local tunes, whatever was around.
And the sources have this fantastic anecdote about his absolute earliest musical attempts. It kind of highlights a pattern of ingenious, slightly rule-breaking solutions he'd use his whole career.
Oh, the infamous violin incident. Yeah, it's a great story.
Tell us about it.
So his older brothers, Larry and Travis, were in local talent shows, and little Buddy wanted in. He chose the violin. The only problem was...
He could play it.
Not a note. So his brother Larry, showing that classic Holly creativity, took a stick of axle grease and just rubbed it all over the bow to silence it completely.
No way.
Yes. So Buddy gets on stage, he's miming along furiously, not making a single sound, and they still won the contest.
That's incredible. But, it's a funny story, but it also kind of foreshadows how he'd later get around that really restrictive Decca contract, doesn't it?
It's a perfect parallel. Always finding an unconventional solution. His formal training, though, was pretty brief.
Yeah, his mom pushed him towards the piano.
For about 9 months, but he quickly gave it up. The real turning point came on the school bus when he saw a classmate playing a guitar and singing.
And that just clicked for him.
Instantly. The connection between the guitar, the voice, the performance, it all made sense.
And it wasn't just any guitar he wanted. His parents got him a steel guitar first, which was huge in Texas country music then.
But he immediately insisted on an acoustic, just like the one his brother Travis had. Travis taught him the basic chords.
And that choice, the acoustic 6-string, that was really key, wasn't it?
It was crucial. It tied him directly into the folk, country, and blues traditions. It let him be both a rhythm and a lead player at the same time, which, became central to his whole style.
So his early influences were exactly what you'd expect from a young Texan in the early 50s.
Well, absolutely. It was pure country and western, Hank Williams, Jimmy Rogers. He and a friend, Bob Montgomery, formed a duo, Buddy and Bob.
And they were playing a lot of covers.
All covers.
Wow.
Acts like the Louvin Brothers, listening to the Grand Ole Opry and Louisiana Hayride. They were really aiming for that commercial country market.
But here's where the divergence begins. The blending of influences that would create that rock and roll sound.
And it was a nocturnal thing. Holly and his friends would sit in his car late at night after the local stations went off the air, and they'd scan the dial for these distant frequencies.
And what were they finding?
Powerful blues and R&B stations, mostly aimed at African-American audiences. By the standards of Lubbock, Texas in the 50s, this was almost like illicit listening.
So he's actively seeking out sounds that are culturally a world away from the country music he's playing every day.
Precisely. That deliberate exposure let him soak up R&B structures, chord progressions, that energy, and then integrate it into his country foundation. By 53, he and Bob are regulars on a local radio show, still mostly playing country.
But the modification was underway.
It was. And then came the seismic event that pushed him all the way. The arrival of Elvis Presley in Lubbock in 1955.
Right. Holly opened from 3 times that year.
3 times, February, April, and June, and the impact was just immediate and visceral. Holly saw that this was the future of music. He'd just graduated high school, and that experience with Elvis convinced him. He was going to pursue music full-time and pivot his band style completely to rock and roll.
And he changed the lineup almost overnight, bringing in a stand-up bass and, critically, Jerry Allison on drums.
And the drums were a big deal. The Nashville country scene was still really resistant to drums. They were seen as too loud, too suggestive of, race music.
So by adding drums, he was basically signaling his total commitment to this new rebellious sound.
Absolutely. And that new aggressive style got him noticed. After opening for Bill Haley in his Comets in October 55, a Nashville scout named Eddie Crandall spotted him.
Which leads directly to the Decca Records contract in February 1956. And this is where the name change happens.
The famous misspelling.
Yeah.
When Decca drafted the contract, they just mistakenly wrote Holly instead of his legal name, Holly. A simple typo.
And it just stuck.
Yeah.
From that moment on, he was Buddy Holly.
Yep. But that whole experience in Nashville, which was supposed to be his big break, it turned into this source of deep creative frustration for him.
Artistically, it was a total disaster for him.
It was. His sessions were controlled by the producer, Owen Bradley. Now, Bradley was a huge figure, famous for crafting these lush, orchestrated hits for stars like Patsy Cline.
So he was trying to fit Holly into that polished, sanitized Nashville box.
And Holly was trying to make raw, R&B-infused rock and roll. The collision was inevitable. Bradley dictated everything. He picked the session musicians who were great players, but totally unsuited for rockabilly.
And Holly wasn't even allowed to play lead guitar, was he?
Nope. He was stuck on acoustic rhythm behind these hired studio pros. The sources are really clear. He had pretty much zero creative control.
So his first real singles, Blue Days, Black Nights, and Modern Dawn 1, they just kind of fizzled. They sounded too constrained.
They didn't capture any of the fire he had on stage. So Decca just declined to renew his contract in January 1957. But they didn't just let him go.
This is the brutal part.
They added this restriction. They legally barred him from re-recording any of the songs he'd done for them, including an early version of That'll Be the Day, for 5 years.
So he's just been fired, and now he can't even use his own material. That's brutal.
It's a huge roadblock. They essentially locked away his earliest work, which forced him into one of the most brilliant pieces of contract subversion in rock history.
The invention of the crickets.
It's a classic case of necessity being the mother of invention. Holly was looking for creative freedom away from Nashville. He saw that other artists were having success with indie producers.
So he seeks out Norman Petty in Clovis, New Mexico.
Right, hoping that an independent studio might be his only path forward. And Petty's studio offered exactly what Nashville didn't: freedom.
He was finally in control.
Yes. In Clovis, with Jerry Allison and his new bassist Joe B. Malden, he recorded a new demo of That'll Be the Day.
The very song he was legally barred from recording under his own name.
Exactly. And this time, he played the lead guitar, getting that distinctive percussive sound that he wanted all along.
And the origin of that song title is such a perfect slice of 1950s Americana.
It really is. The line, That'll Be the Day, comes directly from the John Wayne movie, The Searchers.
Right. Wayne says it over and over again in the film.
It's this phrase of, wry disbelief. The story goes, Holly and Allison saw the movie and just thought it would make a great, slightly cynical rock lyric.
So now Petty has this great demo. How does he legally get around that ironclad Decca restriction?
This is where the legal genius, or maybe sneakiness, comes in. Petty becomes Holly's manager and sends the demo to Brunswick Records,
which was a subsidiary of Decca.
the very same company that had just fired him. So, to completely sidestep the 5-year ban on Buddy Holly recording that song, Petty just credited the track to a fictional band, the Crickets.
A name suggested by Jerry Allison, right? They sound like other insect-themed bands.
That's the one. And because the artist's name was different, Decca couldn't stop it. Brunswick loved the raw energy of the demo so much they released it as is.
So Decca was essentially putting out a hit record by an artist they just dropped, using a song they technically owned the rights to. Amazing.
It's incredible. And this wasn't just a one-off trick. It became the foundation of Holly's calculated double career strategy.
Okay, let's slow down here because this dual identity strategy is where the business side gets really fascinating.
It's a masterstroke by Petty. The strategy involved concurrent contracts with two different Decca subsidiaries. Anything credited to the Crickets went out on Brunswick.
And anything under Buddy Holly's name went out on Coral Records.
Right, which was Decca's main pop label.
But why? Why complicate it like that?
It was purely about market saturation and getting past the radio gatekeepers. Petty knew that disc jockeys in that era were really reluctant to play two brand new songs by the same artist back to back.
They'd see it as, what, overselling one person?
Exactly. But if they got a hot new record from the Crickets and then another hot new record from this guy, Buddy Holly,
They just saw two different successful acts.
they saw two different acts. It allowed Holly to just maximize his airplay. He was essentially competing against himself with two different brands, but it was the same core group of musicians on both releases.
So he got double the exposure, and both labels, Brunswick and Coral, were happy because they each had a star on their roster.
And our sources confirm Holly himself was a little baffled by it. In a 1957 interview, he sounds genuinely confused, saying, "I don't know why they did it that way."
Which shows you this was really a management strategy imposed on him.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting, the billing Buddy Holly and the Crickets never appeared on records during his lifetime. That only happened later, on a 1962 compilation.
And the strategy worked like a charm right out of the gate.
Immediately. That'll Be the Day comes out in July 1957, and it tops both the US and UK charts by September.
And then right after that, Coral releases the solo single, Peggy Sue, backed with Every Day.
And that hits number 3 on the Billboard pop chart. The two-pronged attack was a massive success. He was suddenly a major star.
Which led to some groundbreaking and I guess initially pretty awkward live shows. Let's talk about the Apollo Theater in Harlem.
August 1957. This was a huge moment, not just for Holly, but for the racial integration of rock and roll. They were booked at the legendary Apollo.
A venue synonymous with black musical excellence.
And they were the very first white act to ever perform there.
And the audience reaction, from what I've read, was not exactly a warm welcome at first.
Not at all. The audience was reportedly stone cold. Here's this band looking a little out of place in their suits. They didn't immediately connect with the Apollo's R&B and jazz crowd.
But they were savvy.
Incredibly savvy. They realized they needed to bridge that gap, so they launched into a Bo Diddley cover.
And that did it.
That did it. Connecting to those foundational R&B roots earned them respect from a very discerning audience. It showed that Holly really understood and respected the music he was synthesizing.
After that, they got massive national exposure on The Ed Sullivan Show in December.
Which is huge, but the touring demands were just relentless. And this led directly to the first major lineup change. Rhythm guitarist Nikki Sullivan left right after the Sullivan Show.
And it wasn't a musical dispute or anything.
No, the sources say it was just pure exhaustion, the nonstop travel, the grind of the road. He wanted to go back to school. It tells you a lot about the pace of early rock stardom. It was brutal.
Okay, so let's shift from the business side and the touring grind to Holly's actual identity, because this is where that blueprint really takes shape. He defined the look, the sound, the whole package.
I agree. Let's start with the sound. His vocals were so distinctive. Those trademark vocal hiccups he used.
That was a deliberate choice, right?
Okay.
He got that from Elvis.
He did. He saw Elvis perform and noticed how Presley used those little breaks in his vocal line to add this urgency and a kind of playful vulnerability.
And his vocal range was so interesting. He could flip from his regular voice into this smooth, sweet falsetto, like on a song like Every Day.
It added this emotional complexity you didn't hear in a lot of rockabilly. And then there's the guitar style. It was so innovative. He blended this chunky, driving rhythm with high-string lead work.
Very percussive.
Very percussive, with lots of stops and starts, bent notes, and crucially, those R&B chord progressions. He was the lead player and the rhythm machine all at once.
And the instrument itself is almost a character in this story. The Fender Stratocaster.
It's inseparable from his image. He bought his first one in Lubbock. It was a revolutionary instrument at the time. It looked like something from the future.
His first one, a 54 model, got stolen, right?
Yep, stolen in Michigan in 1957. He immediately went out and bought a 57 model in Detroit. The sources say he owned 4 or 5 Stratocasters in his career.
And his choice basically popularized that guitar for generations. I mean, think of Clapton, Hendrix, Richards?
They all built on the foundation Hawley established. For so many young musicians, seeing him with that futuristic guitar was a pivotal moment.
And then there's his image. The band started out in these stuffy business suits.
Until the Everly Brothers gave them a makeover, they took them to a men's shop in New York City and introduced them to Ivy League clothes. The button-down shirts, a more youthful, casual look.
It softened their image while still keeping them sharp. But the truly defining feature, the thing that made him an iconoclast, was the glasses.
Absolutely. And the Everlys were involved there, too. They told him to ditch his old-fashioned glasses for the thick, horn-rimmed style that was getting popular.
He was severely nearsighted, so he needed them to see. But he turned a practical necessity into a deliberate fashion statement.
He did. It completely defied the clean-cut, perfect rock idol mold that Elvis had established. He bought a pair made in Mexico, and they immediately became known as Buddy Holly glasses.
And it started a huge trend. Suddenly, it was cool for teenagers to wear glasses.
It allowed kids who wore glasses to connect with rock music. It resonated deeply with artists who didn't fit that matinee idol look, which is why you see a direct line to someone like Elvis Costello decades later.
And his innovations weren't just on stage. He was a real pioneer in the studio.
This is so critical and often overlooked. Working with Norman Petty, Hawley was one of the first rock artists to really master techniques like overdubbing and reverb.
Overdubbing was radical back then.
It was. Most rock and roll in '57 was recorded live to tape. Hawley would record a lead vocal and then layer his own backing vocals and harmonies over it. Think of the sound on Words of Love.
He was creating a much richer, fuller sound from just a small group.
And this brings us back to that standard lineup.
Yeah.
2 guitars, bass, and drums. It was so effective because it was a perfect balance. The lead guitar could soar, the rhythm guitar provided the bedrock. It was a tight, self-sufficient unit designed for maximum sonic punch, the template.
And his final studio project took that ambition even further, moving away from the cricket sound entirely. We're talking about the string sessions.
October 1958. This is after he moved to New York and started thinking bigger. These sessions involved an 18-piece ensemble made up of former members of the NBC Symphony Orchestra.
Using classical musicians to back a rock and roll singer, that was practically unheard of.
He was trying to legitimize rock and roll as a serious art form. He recorded 4 tracks: True Love Ways, Moon Dreams, Raining in My Heart, and It Doesn't Matter Anymore.
And these recordings were also way ahead of their time technically, weren't they?
Oh, cutting edge. Those 4 tracks were the only songs on his label ever mixed in stereo during his lifetime. Stereo was an absolute novelty in pop music in 1958. He was anticipating the future of audio while pushing genre boundaries.
It's an incredible burst of creativity. But it also coincided with a whirlwind personal life that was about to clash with his career management.
1958 was a massive year for him. In June, he walks into a music publisher's office in New York and meets a receptionist named Maria Elena Santiago.
And the romance moved at the same speed as his career, breakneck.
Absolutely. He proposed to her on their very first date during dinner. He famously hid the ring inside a red rose.
And they were married less than 2 months later in August 1958.
Yep. And Norman Petty was furious about it.
From a purely commercial 1950s perspective, you can kind of see his point, right? The teen idol was supposed to be single and available to his fans.
Sure, Petty saw it as a financial threat, but it shows the fundamental conflict. Hawley was moving beyond being a teen idol. He was becoming a serious artist, a husband, and Petty couldn't handle that.
So they settle into life in Greenwich Village. And this move, it wasn't just geographical, it was an artistic declaration.
It was. He was immersing himself in jazz and R&B, going to places like the Village Gate and the Blue Note. It was fueling these grander ambitions he had.
He had huge plans that had nothing to do with the cricket sound.
Gigantic plans. He wanted to learn flamenco guitar. He wanted to make a collaborative album with Ray Charles and Mahalia Jackson.
Fusing soul and rock and roll.
Wow. And maybe most surprising, he registered for acting classes with Lee Strasberg's famous Actors Studio. He was just beginning his second, more mature, artistic phase.
But the immediate reality was they had to hide the marriage.
On tour, Maria Elena was introduced as the cricket's secretary. She handled logistics, equipment, and crucially, she started collecting the concert revenues right after the shows.
And that's what led to the financial discovery and the break with Petty.
It's how it all unraveled. Instead of sending the money back to Petty in New Mexico, she and Buddy started keeping track of it. And they quickly realized that Petty was diverting the band's royalties, paying them directly into his own company's account.
He was hiding the money from them.
Essentially, yes. It was a devastating violation of trust. So Holly immediately moves to get his money back and fire Petty. He hired a lawyer that the Everly Brothers recommended.
Because they were having similar problems with their own manager.
It was a pattern in early rock and roll. But then the legal battle got even more complicated. A New York promoter named Manny Greenfield sued Holly.
Claiming he was owed more money.
And that lawsuit was strategically timed. Because Holly's royalties were being paid out of New York, the courts were able to immediately freeze all of his royalty payments until that dispute was settled.
So he's a chart-topping star living in an expensive New York apartment, and suddenly his entire income stream is just gone.
He was financially paralyzed. He officially split with Petty in December 1958. The other Crickets actually stayed with Petty as their manager, and the split from Holly was amicable. It was just a logistical thing.
But with his rent due and his funds totally frozen, he was forced back on the road just to make some quick cash.
And that desperation, that economic pressure, is what led directly to the ill-fated Winter Dance Party tour. He had to put all his big artistic plans on hold just to generate the cash he needed to survive.
And this is when he recorded those raw, acoustic apartment demos.
Yes. Songs like Crying, Waiting, Hoping, they're so intimate and vulnerable, a stark contrast to the lush string sessions from just months earlier.
Which sets the stage for one of the most infamously disastrous tours in music history, the Winter Dance Party.
It kicked off January 23, 1959, and it was a logistical nightmare from the start. Holly put together a new band, Waylon Jennings on bass, Tommy Allsup on guitar.
And the schedule was just atrocious, huge distances between gigs across the Midwest.
In the dead of winter, traveling in unheated buses, the conditions were just awful. The buses kept breaking down.
And their drummer, Carl Bunch, ended up in the hospital.
With frostbite on his toes, yeah. They were all exhausted, sick, and miserable.
So before the show at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, on February 2nd, Holly, desperate to get ahead of schedule, get some rest, maybe do some laundry, he chartered a plane.
A 4-seat Beechcraft Bonanza. The plan was to fly himself, Waylon Jennings, and Tommy Allsup to their next stop. The decision was born of absolute exhaustion.
And this brings us to the famous coin toss, the moment that saved Tommy Allsup's life.
Right. Allsup flipped a coin with Richie Valens for his seat on the plane. Valens had a cold and really wanted the comfort of the flight.
And Valens won the toss?
He won, and the sources record him saying something just chilling. That's the first time I've ever won anything in my life. Allsup's life was spared. He later opened a bar called the Heads Up Saloon.
In the second intervention, Waylon Jennings giving up his seat was just a simple act of kindness.
It was. He gave his seat to J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, who was really sick with the flu and was complaining about the cold bus. A simple act of compassion.
Which saved Jennings' life, but left him with a lifetime of guilt over a joke he shared with Holly just before takeoff.
A heavy burden to carry. And then, shortly after 1 a.m. on February 3, 1959,
the plane went down.
It crashed into a cornfield just 5 miles from the airport, killing Holly, Valens, Richardson, and the pilot, Rod Peterson, instantly. Buddy Holly was 22 years old.
What did the official investigation finally point to as the cause?
It was pilot error, compounded by terrible weather. The pilot, Roger Peterson, was only 21, and he wasn't certified to fly solely by instruments. He flew into snow and clouds and lost his visual reference with the ground.
And there was a specific mechanical issue, wasn't there? The gyroscope?
That's right. The plane had a newly installed gyroscope, but it worked backward from what the pilot was likely used to. He probably thought the plane was climbing when it was actually descending. In those blinding conditions, he flew it straight into the ground.
The aftermath was just brutal, and the details from the crash site fueled decades of fan rumors.
They did. The Big Bopper's body was found nearly 40 feet from the wreckage, which made people think he might have survived the impact. An autopsy in 2007 confirmed he died instantly.
And the gun.
A gun belonging to Holly was found 2 months later, which fueled these bizarre rumors that the pilot was shot. There was zero evidence to support that.
The day after the crash, the tragedy hit Maria Elena Santiago even harder back in New York.
She suffered a miscarriage. She reportedly saw the horrific news on television, and this personal grief had a profound, immediate social consequence.
A policy change.
It was a direct result of the trauma the families experienced. The authorities implemented a policy against announcing victims' names to the media until the next of kin have been personally informed. That policy exists to this day because of what happened.
His funeral was held a few days later in Lubbock.
The pallbearers were all the guys from his short life. Jerry Allison, Joby Malden, Sonny Curtis. The painful irony is that Waylon Jennings couldn't attend because he had to continue on with the tour.
He's buried in the City of Lubbock Cemetery. His headstone has the correct spelling, Holly, and a carving of his Stratocaster.
And it's so telling that his wife, Maria Elena, has never visited the gravesite. The pain was just too immense.
And what about the iconic glasses? They were lost for over 2 decades.
Presumed lost forever. They weren't found until March 1980. They had been recovered from the site back in '59, but were put in an envelope and just misplaced in a courthouse storage area.
20 years just sitting in an envelope.
Just a simple administrative error. They were eventually returned to Maria Elena and are now on display at the Buddy Holly Center in Lubbock, a small, tangible link back to him.
Which brings us to his staggering legacy. Because despite his short career, he recorded so much that his label was releasing new material for a decade after his death.
He left behind this treasure trove of unfinished recordings, solo acoustic demos, jam sessions. Those last 6 acoustic songs he recorded in his apartment became the foundation for the first posthumous releases.
And the label got creative with him, didn't they?
They did. They overdubbed those raw acoustic demos with new studio musicians to try and simulate the Crickets sound. The first single, Peggy Sue Got Married, was a hit.
And that was successful enough to warrant a whole album of overdubbed demos.
And the demand was so relentless, the label kept digging. They used Petty's unreleased masters, audition tapes, even lo-fi amateur recordings from as early as 1954. They were able to release new Holly albums and singles all the way until 1969.
Which speaks to the sheer quality and quantity of what he created. The critical acclaim has always been unanimous.
AllMusic called him the single most influential creative force in early rock and roll. And beyond the Hall of Fame inductions, the honors are ongoing. A Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
And Lubbock has fully embraced him, the Buddy Holly Center, the Buddy Holly Hall of Performing Arts.
His image, that Stratocaster and those glasses, is just permanently enshrined.
This is where it gets really interesting for me, tracing that direct line of influence. Because his death meant that countless artists who came next had to learn from his recordings, turning his short output into a definitive template.
And you have to start with Don McLean's American Pie. McLean coined the phrase, "the day the music died," cementing the emotional weight of that date in popular memory.
He dedicated the whole album to Holly.
He did. And McLean later argued that Holly would have the same stature even if he hadn't died, simply because of his accomplishments. He wrote most of his 50 tracks by age 22. He was the template.
And the most famous interpreters of that template were the Beatles.
The connection is so profound. Lennon and McCartney saw him perform on TV in London. They studied his song structures, his performance style, his lyricism.
And the deepest tribute is in their name.
Yes. They chose the name The Beatles as a direct homage to Holly's insect-themed band, the Crickets. The Quarrymen covered That'll Be the Day in 1958.
And the Beatles kept covering his songs even after they were famous.
They released a really reverent cover of Words of Love in '64. Lennon covered Peggy Sue on his solo rock and roll album. And of course, Paul McCartney now owns the publishing rights to Holly's entire song catalog.
The influence wasn't just in Liverpool. The Rolling Stones were shaped by him too.
Mick Jagger saw him perform live on that '58 tour. He was blown away by Holly's performance of Not Fade Away, which the Stones later turned into a huge hit.
And Keith Richards summed it up perfectly.
He said Holly passed it on via the Beatles and via the Rolling Stones. He's in everybody. And that one quote just captures the entire thesis. Holly was the essential link in the chain.
And then there's Bob Dylan's intensely personal, almost spiritual connection. He saw Holly just 2 nights before the crash.
It's one of the most powerful anecdotes in rock history. A 17-year-old Dylan was in the audience in Duluth, Minnesota. He talked about it almost 40 years later in his Grammy acceptance speech.
What did you recall?
He said he remembered Holly looking right at him during the show, and that he felt Holly was with us all the time we were making this record. It's this profound, direct link between early rock and the folk revival Dylan would lead.
The network is just vast.
Yeah.
Eric Clapton credits Holly with introducing him to the Stratocaster.
Clapton said that Chirping Crickets was the first album he ever bought. And seeing Holly with the Strat, he called it an instrument from outer space and knew that was the future.
And Holly's death directly launched the career of Bobby Vee.
Absolutely. Vee was hired to replace Holly on the rest of the tour. You can hear Holly's influence all over Vee's vocal style on his early hits.
We even see his visual influence pop up decades later with Elvis Costello.
The glasses, the style. Bob Dylan even commented on it in one of his books, calling Costello the Buddy stereotype. It shows the lasting power of that iconic image.
It seems like every rock giant had a connection.
Bruce Springsteen told Rolling Stone, I play Buddy Holly every night before I go on. That keeps me honest. And the Grateful Dead made Not Fade Away a staple of their live shows.
This entire deep dive, it's just a staggering portrait of how a life cut so short created a legacy that was magnified by its own brevity.
It really hammers home that duality. On one hand, he was this incredible creative visionary writing his own stuff, pioneering the band format, experimenting in the studio. But on the other, he was a total victim of circumstance, caught between frozen royalties and a criminally mismanaged tour that forced him onto that plane.
And the non-musical legacy is so unexpected. The fact that the policy for notifying families of victims changed because of the trauma his family went through.
It's a chilling reminder, and it's all punctuated by the perpetual pain felt by his wife, Maria Elena, who to this day has never visited his gravesite.
What's so fascinating, what we touched on earlier, isn't just what he did, but what he was about to do. He was registered for acting classes. He was planning collaborations with Ray Charles and Mahalia Jackson.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, when you're thinking about this body of work?
Well, it raises a pretty important question for you to consider. Given this level of cross-genre ambition, his foresight, his move to New York, the creative hub of the world, how much of music history actually changed because we lost those collaborations? The depth of his influence is staggering, but the magnitude of the loss of his future creative output, that remains one of rock history's greatest unknowns.
He was defining the sound of the 60s before the 60s had even begun.
A profound thought on which to end. That was the deep dive into the brief, brilliant world of Buddy Holly, the architect of rock and roll. Thank you for joining us.